There are some cases where the most disturbing part is the violence. And then there are cases where the violence is only the surface, because underneath it there is planning, ego, humiliation, control, a person who is not just trying to hurt someone, but trying to control how the entire story will be remembered. This is one of those cases. A woman is attacked in her own bedroom just after midnight on New Year's Day. The attacker is dressed in black, wearing a mask, using a fake voice. He beats her with a gun. He strangles her. He binds her wrists with zip ties that were prepared ahead of time. He sexually assaults her. Then he takes her phone, uses it to unlock a door to the back porch, drags her outside naked with a pillowcase over her head, leaves her there in the dark, and warns her not to move unless she hears a certain signal. Then, 40 minutes later, her ex-husband appears. He finds her. He comforts her. He calls 911. And for a few moments, it looks like he might be the hero. But detectives would later come to believe something far darker, that the man who rescued Morgan Metzer was the same man who had just attacked her. And according to investigators, that rescue may have been part of the plan all along. If you follow true crime because you want the details most people skip, stay with me on this one. And tell me where you're watching from, because this case is one of those stories that keeps getting worse the more specific it becomes. By the time New Year's Eve 2020 arrived, Morgan Metzer was trying to start over. She had recently finalized her divorce. Her 8-year-old twins were away in Florida with her sister for a few days, and after years of chaos inside her marriage, she was finally starting to feel something close to peace. That detail matters, because in so many domestic cases, the most dangerous moment is not always during the relationship. It's when one person realizes the other one really means it this time. It's when separation becomes real. It's when access is being cut off. Morgan and Rod Metzer had known each other for almost 20 years. She met him when she was 14. He was 17. It moved fast, the way intense teenage relationships sometimes do, especially when both people start treating first love like destiny. They eventually married in 2009. From the outside, it looked like a relationship built on history and permanence. Families were involved. There were wedding photos, vows, and all the language people use when they believe they are building a forever life. But inside that marriage, the story had already begun to fracture. Not long after the wedding, Rod's younger brother, Kevin, died of leukemia at just 19 years old. The loss hit the family hard. Then Morgan and Rod had a baby boy. They named him Kevin. He was born with a congenital heart defect and lived only 18 days. Morgan later said he died on his due date. Imagine that amount of grief stacked into such a short stretch of marriage. 2 devastating losses, 2 emotional shocks. Then, just 3 months later, Morgan became pregnant again and gave birth to healthy twins in 2012, a boy and a girl. It should have been a turning point, a new chapter, a second chance at happiness. If you're into true crime stories that deserve to be talked about far more than they are, subscribe, stay with me, and tell me where you're watching from tonight. Because this one is disturbing from the very first minute. Instead, according to Morgan, the marriage began changing not long after that. Around the time the twins were toddlers, Rod lost his job. Morgan's career, on the other hand, was exploding. She started an interior design business called Shiplap and Sugar, and it grew quickly enough that she brought in her best friend Nicole to help. Morgan was working hard, making money, and building something of her own. Rod, meanwhile, was struggling financially. Morgan later described that combination as dangerous, because according to her, that was when the abuse escalated. Physical abuse, emotional abuse, sexual abuse. And just as damaging as all of that, gaslighting. That word gets used a lot now, sometimes too loosely. But in this case, the behavior described is classic coercive control. Morgan said there were times Rod would hurt her and then somehow convince other people that she had caused it. She described one Labor Day weekend when an argument turned violent and she called her father to come get her. But instead of accountability, she said Rod sold another version of events to the people around them, one where she was unstable and he was only reacting. She even described an incident where he allegedly rolled himself down the stairs, injured himself, and told the children their mother had pushed him. That is not a normal argument. That is a person trying to manufacture reality inside a household. Over time, Morgan said she started doubting herself. That is what makes coercive control so effective. It is not just about fear. It is about confusion. The victim begins to live in a permanent state of self-questioning. Was it really that bad? Did I provoke it? Did that even happen the way I remember it? And once a person reaches that point, Leaving is no longer just about walking out the door. It becomes about trusting your own mind again. Morgan filed for divorce in 2020. By December, it was final, and that should have been the ending. But according to investigators, Rod found another way back into her life. He told Morgan he had pancreatic cancer. Think about what a claim like that does. No matter how hurt, exhausted, or determined a person is to move on, a diagnosis like that changes the emotional gravity instantly. Morgan said he showed her medical paperwork. He presented it like a crisis, and because he was the father of her children, she responded with compassion. She allowed him back into her space. She let him stay at her house while he was allegedly upset and spiraling. But at the same time, he was pushing for reconciliation, begging her to get back together, pressuring her, telling her he would earn more money, that she could stop working, that he could fix things if only she would let him back in. Morgan said she had no interest. By the morning of December 31st, she had reached her limit and told him to leave. And when she did, he did not accept it. That New Year's Eve, Morgan was supposed to spend a quiet night with her best friend Nicole. Nothing dramatic, a glass of wine, staying in, watching the ball drop. Nicole later recalled giving Morgan a hard time for leaving early because they rarely got to relax together anymore. But Morgan was exhausted. She went home alone, shut the house down, and went to bed. Her kids were still away. It was just her, the dog, and a locked house on a quiet night. Around 11:59 p.m., fireworks woke her. She later said she got up, kissed her dog, wished him a happy new year, and went back to bed. That tiny detail is one of the reasons this case hits so hard, because it places you right there in the normalcy of it. She was not on alert. She was not waiting for danger. She was having one of those sleepy, almost sweet midnight moments people have at the start of a new year. Then she opened her eyes again and saw a man standing in her bedroom doorway. He was dressed entirely in black. Black hoodie, black pants, black gloves, a mask. He was standing there lit from behind. Morgan screamed, and he pounced on her. He hit her with a gun. He punched her. He turned her over and restrained her wrists behind her back with pre-looped zip ties. Not just random restraints grabbed in panic, but zip ties that had been prepared in advance so they could be slipped on quickly. That detail tells you a lot about what kind of attack this was. This was not spontaneous rage. This was preparation. He had thought about control before he ever entered that room. Morgan said the attacker spoke very little, but when he did, his voice sounded forced, low, rough, like someone trying to sound like Batman. He told her she had done something wrong. He said she was going to regret it. Then he kept beating her. He strangled her to the point where she believed she was about to pass out. She later said she thought she was going to die. And in that moment, with a masked intruder on top of her in her own bed, why wouldn't she? He had a gun. He had restraints. He was in control of the room. And then, as if to make things even more chilling, he said something about her husband. That told her almost immediately this was not random. This person knew who she was. He knew the context of her life. He knew she had recently divorced. Then he demanded valuables, jewelry, expensive items. He started going through drawers. Then he demanded her phone and her passcode. That is another important detail, because Morgan's house had a security system controlled through an app on her phone. That app handled the cameras and the lock on a second-floor bedroom door leading to the back porch. Once he had her phone, he had access not just to her information, but to the architecture of the house itself. Morgan later said she heard the lock open remotely. Then the attacker put a pillowcase over her head, got her out of bed, and walked her onto the back porch naked, still restrained, still injured, still blind to what came next. And this is where her instincts started catching up to the truth. At first, Morgan thought it might be some random predator. But as the attack unfolded, 2 moments changed that. First, when she pleaded with the intruder not to hurt her husband, the emotional tone changed instantly. That reaction stayed with her. Second, when he physically lifted her and moved her, something about the way he handled her felt familiar. She connected it to pregnancy years earlier, when he had helped her out of bed while she was carrying the twins. In the middle of a brutal assault, her body recognized him before she could say it out loud. She later said that was the moment she truly knew it was Rod. But she kept that realization to herself, because if he knew she had identified him, she had no idea what he would do next. He left her on the porch and warned her not to get up until she heard 2 car honks, or he would kill her. Then he disappeared. Try to imagine what those next 40 minutes felt like. She was outside, naked, bound, injured, with a pillowcase over her head, on a secluded property where no neighbor was likely to hear or see anything. She did not know if the attacker had left. She did not know if he was hiding nearby, watching her. She did not know whether disobeying would trigger another assault or her murder. She later said she listened to the stream and tried to stay calm. That is one of those survivor details that tells you how close fear can get to pure survival instinct. When there is nothing left to do, people cling to whatever sound is still ordinary: water, wind, a creaking board, anything that makes the nightmare feel measurable. Then she heard someone walking up. At first, she thought the attacker had returned. Instead, she heard a familiar voice. Rod's. He came up onto the porch. He acted shocked. He comforted her. And then he called 911, telling dispatch that someone had broken in, that Morgan was tied up with a hood over her head, and that the back door was open. On the surface, it looked like a remarkable coincidence. An ex-husband, alerted by some eerie warning, arriving just in time to save the mother of his children. That is the version he seemed to want everyone to see. But detectives did not like the feel of it. When investigators arrived around 3 a.m., Morgan's injuries were immediately obvious. One eye was swollen shut and black and blue. She still had one of the zip-tie restraints attached. Detectives described it as an emotional attack, not some simple property crime. The violence looked personal. Rod's demeanor also struck them as off. One detective later said Rod asked him if he was the person they had been waiting on, then told him to do his job. That is not the energy most people expect from a man who just found his ex-wife beaten and bound on a porch in the middle of the night. It felt cold, detached, wrong. So they separated everyone and interviewed Morgan privately. That may have been the turning point of the entire case. Away from Rod, Morgan told detectives she thought her attacker was her ex-husband. She explained the shift in the attacker's mood when she mentioned loving her husband. She described the physical familiarity of the way he lifted her. Then she told them about the week leading up to the attack, the pancreatic cancer story, letting him stay at the house, the constant pressure to reconcile, his refusal to tell anyone else about the diagnosis, and finally, her text telling him she would be staying at her parents' house that night and turning her phone off because she needed space. That last detail mattered immediately. If Rod believed she would be at her parents' house, why did he go straight to her house? Why not call the parents? Why not drive there first? Why was he at the exact location where he claimed to discover her? Rod had an answer. He told investigators he had been at his apartment brushing his teeth when he heard someone knock on his window and say Morgan's name. He said he tried calling her, got no answer, and made the roughly 12-minute drive to her house because he feared something bad was happening. It sounds eerie. It almost sounds cinematic. But detectives were already skeptical, and that skepticism deepened when they asked to see his phone. Inside a hidden folder, investigators found private images of Morgan, including nude and partially nude photos that appeared to have been taken without her knowledge. They also found pictures of Morgan's phone showing text messages between her and another man. To investigators, that was not heartbreak. That was surveillance. That was stalking behavior. And it was enough for them to arrest him immediately on privacy-related charges while they pursued search warrants for the rest. At that point, the case started opening up quickly. The key home security footage from the time frame of the attack had been deleted through the app on Morgan's phone, and the phone itself was never recovered. That alone is a huge detail, because it suggests the attacker not only understood the system, but intentionally wiped the most incriminating window. Detectives then examined the physical entry point into the home and found that a basement window alarm sensor had been removed and positioned so the alarm system would still register the window as closed. Investigators believed Rod may have done this in advance while staying at Morgan's house during the week of the fake cancer scare. In other words, the entry may have been prepared before New Year's Eve ever began. Then there was the check. Earlier that evening, Rod had sent Morgan a photo of a check left under her front porch. The amount was more than $56,000. It looked like a dramatic gesture, as if he were trying to prove he could change, provide, or win her back financially. Morgan came home, retrieved it, and placed it inside. Later, investigators found that the check would have bounced. He did not have the money. It was another illusion, another manufactured performance meant to draw her back in, and the check itself disappeared during the attack. Then, investigators searched Rod's apartment. That is where the case stopped being suspicious and started becoming devastating. Inside, they found a bag of black zip ties and a cut tail portion from a zip tie. One of the restraints used on Morgan was unusually distinctive because it had additional zip tie heads attached and cut, creating a very particular configuration. Crime scene technicians compared the cut piece found in Rod's apartment to the restraint used on Morgan's wrist and determined that the striations lined up exactly. A perfect cut, a physical match between the suspect's apartment and the restraint used during the assault. That is the kind of evidence that collapses a defense fast, but it didn't stop there. Investigators also found a book in Rod's apartment about becoming her hero. That by itself might sound almost too symbolic to mention, but paired with the theory detectives were building, it was chilling, because by then they believed he had staged the entire thing, in part to come back into Morgan's life as her rescuer. Then they pulled his browser history. According to investigators, the searches included how to change your voice, how long it takes to choke someone unconscious, how to crack an iPhone password, how to get sympathy from your ex, and cancer diagnosis letters. There was also digital evidence showing he had created a fake email account and used it to generate a fraudulent pancreatic cancer diagnosis letter and a fake doctor's bill. That means the supposed medical crisis that got him back into Morgan's home may have been a complete fabrication from the start. Now think about the pattern that was emerging. Fake illness to gain access, pressure to reconcile, a text from Morgan saying she would be somewhere else that night, a mysterious large check under the porch, a prepared entry point, pre-looped zip ties, a disguised voice, deleted surveillance, a rescue, and then more evidence kept coming. Investigators traced the black zip ties to Lowe's. They checked local stores and found the purchase. Rod had bought them on December 30th, about 36 hours before the attack, using his debit card. Store surveillance showed him there. Then detectives reviewed cameras at Rod's apartment complex. According to investigators, they did not see footage confirming his story about leaving because of a mysterious knock at the window. What they did see was Rod returning to the apartment after the time frame of the attack, looking hurried and disheveled. Then, only 4 minutes later, he left again, wearing different clothes and carrying a plastic bag. The timestamp was around 1:24 a.m. Investigators never found the bag, the attacker's mask, or Morgan's phone, but they believed he may have discarded evidence during that gap before driving back to her house to play the rescuer. If you are watching this and thinking this sounds less like a spontaneous crime and more like a script written by someone desperate to control the ending, that is exactly why this case is so haunting, because it suggests something deeper than rage. It suggests entitlement. It suggests a man who could not accept that Morgan's life was no longer going to orbit around him, so he tried to create a scenario where he became central again, through fear. He could not make her love him. He could not make her choose him. So according to investigators, he tried something else, become the one person she would need after a nightmare he created himself. Rod was later interviewed again. Detectives confronted him about the fake cancer, the internet searches, and the zip tie evidence. He denied critical points, tried to question the investigators' tone, and at one point reacted strongly when they made clear they believed he was responsible. But the case had already moved beyond his story. There was physical evidence, digital evidence, purchase history, surveillance footage, deleted security data, and Morgan's own account tying it all together. Hours after one of those interviews, he was charged with multiple counts, including home invasion, kidnapping, aggravated assault, and sexual battery. And then came one more detail that says so much about survivors in cases like this. Morgan later said that when an investigator told her he believed her, she melted. Not because the ordeal was over, not because justice was already complete, but because she had not felt heard in years. That line matters more than people realize. In so many abusive relationships, the violence is devastating, but the disbelief around it can be its own form of trauma. Victims are trained to doubt themselves. People around them miss the pattern. The abuser stays polished, persuasive, even sympathetic. And then one day, it takes a crime scene, a 911 call, and a stack of forensic evidence for the victim's reality to finally be treated as real. Rod Metzer ultimately pleaded guilty on August 4, 2021, to 14 counts related to Morgan's attack and the invasive photos found on his phone. He agreed to serve 25 years of a 70-year sentence, followed by decades of probation. Morgan later delivered a victim impact statement describing the final years of her marriage as life with a monster trying to break her down and fence her in. She said walking out of that courtroom felt like taking 1,000 pounds off her shoulders. Her best friend later described that moment as Morgan finally laying the relationship to rest and making one thing clear. He was never going to own her story again. And that may be the truest ending to this case. Not the plea, not the sentence, not even the evidence, overwhelming as it was. The real ending is that Morgan survived a night that was designed to reduce her to fear, and she got to be the one who spoke last. What stays with me most here is not just that the case was specific, though it was detailed, planned, forensic, traceable. It is that every layer reveals another form of control, the fake cancer to pull her close, the hidden photos to monitor her, the staged financial gesture, the prepared restraints, the altered voice, the deleted footage, the performed rescue. That is why this story lingers. Because it forces you to ask a question that is terrifying in its own way. How many people confuse obsessive control for love until it becomes impossible to deny? How many women are living in the earlier chapters of stories like this right now? Not with masked intruders yet, not with zip ties or deleted footage yet, but with manipulation, surveillance, pressure, boundary violations, sympathy traps, lies that pull them back in, little performances that keep them emotionally trapped long after they've tried to leave. And would the people around them recognize the danger before it escalates? That is what makes this more than just one crime story. It is a warning, because the most dangerous person is not always the one who looks dangerous from the start. Sometimes it is the one who knows how to perform. The one who knows when to cry, when to beg, when to fake a diagnosis, when to leave a big check under the porch, when to monitor private messages, when to study the layout of a house, when to disguise his voice, and when to arrive just in time to look like the hero. And in this case, if investigators are right, that performance almost worked. Almost, but not quite. Because Morgan survived, she spoke, she was believed, and in the end, the man who allegedly tried to control both the violence and the narrative lost control of both. That is where this story really ends. Not with the attack, not with the 911 call, not even with the guilty plea. It ends with the performance collapsing, with the mask no longer hiding the person beneath it, with a survivor refusing to let the man who terrorized her also define what happened to her. And that may be the most powerful part of all, because in a case built on manipulation, the truth still got the last word.